Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Parent Talks here at Vancouver College. Thank you for joining us. Today, our target audience is our elementary school, so we're thrilled to have some of you join us online and in person here. I'm Tasso Canavos, school principal here, for those of you who don't know me. And I think I'll just turn it over to Kimberly Ma, our Director of Learning Support, to introduce our speaker. Enjoy the evening.
Hey, it's my pleasure to introduce Sam Zattera, who is a speech language pathologist who works at VC with boys in elementary all the way to senior school. And Sam works with many students on improving executive function skills and helping them just with strategies at school and at home. And so we wanted him to share some of these strategies with you, and we hope you enjoy the evening and take away some strategies that you can use at home with your families. Thanks, Sam.
Amazing. Thanks for the introduction. Okay, so like Kimberly said, my name's Sam. I am an SLP, and today we're going to be talking about strategies to use at home to support your children with executive functioning. So a little bit quick about me. As I mentioned, speech language pathologist, also known as a speech therapist. So you might reasonably think that we're going to talk about speech or language, but we're not. So you might wonder, why are we here, right? And of course, we're here to support your kids with strategies. But what does that look like? So I'm back at the title here because I wanted to highlight the fact that we've mentioned focus. And I think that's the thing that we kind of picked as one of those executive functions that really resonates across different age groups, even to the youngest students. So I think that's why we've chosen it. But focus is an executive function and far from the only one. So today, what we're going to be doing is talking a bit about executive functions, what they are, why they matter, uh, and why you should care about them. And then also, of course, talking about strategies. I like to spend as much time as I can focusing on strategies, but we do need to do a little bit of background first. So, what are executive functions? Well, the Canadian Psychological Association describes them as basically the skills that you need to carry on your day-to-day tasks. And this is going to ring true for anyone of any age. But of course, when you're young and you're learning new things, you are really developing and learning your executive functions, and it begins very young. So you can think of your executive functioning as your management system or the command center in your brain. Basically, executive meaning, higher up, functions meaning sort of processes and skills. And it's those higher up processes that help you kind of accomplish everything you need to do. So when we're talking about really little kiddos, we're talking about, just getting your shoes on in the morning and, your nighttime routines and your morning routines and you're getting ready for school. But of course, when you're at school, you're constantly using executive functioning skills to manage your time and get things done in class, and organize what you're going to be able to bring home and do at home. And that only scales up as you get older, but it rings true even at a very young age. So, what exactly are executive functions? The only one I've mentioned so far is focus, but there are a bunch more. So, the main three are working memory, inhibition, and cognitive flexibility. I say main three because depending on where you look for this information, you might hear slightly different terms used for executive functions. And that really is because it's a category of skills that you need to do. It's a bit vague in the sense that it's just this high level category, and exactly what you want to consider an executive function and what you don't might differ slightly from researcher to researcher, professional to professional, but there are some that everyone broadly agrees on. So working memory you can think of as the memory that you are actively working with at any point in time, and that's going to come back later, so I'll skip right over it to inhibition, which is, I tend to think of it as synonymous with impulse control, which is a little bit of an oversimplification, but I think that kids, especially young kids, being bad at controlling their impulses is something that every parent can kind of relate to. Um, I certainly see it in sessions or even in games. If you play a game with a little kid, they might cheat, and it's not for malicious intent. It's just that they don't have that impulse control to know that they shouldn't cheat for some reason. They want to know the answer, so they look at the answer, right? But if you can't inhibit yourself, inhibit those sort of desires or stop those impulses, right, that's going to have some serious social consequences. It could have serious learning consequences. It could be disruptive in class, that kind of thing. and especially disruptive at home too, which I know everyone's probably thinking a bit more on as a parent. And cognitive flexibility is kind of what it sounds like, your ability to manipulate information in sort of varied and flexible ways and adapt as new information comes to light. But of course, these are just the main three. There are also a bunch more. I'm not going to list them all here, but you can look at them and you can see how these are important and these matter. And of course, focus comes back here, attention, organizing your time, organizing your space, time management, and other things that I think might get overlooked, like self-monitoring and emotional regulation. A lot of this attention, planning, organization, that feels kind of admin, but emotional regulation, your ability to understand what you're feeling at any point in time, and then what you need to do to change that or accommodate that or get you into an emotion that's going to help you to succeed, whether it's at home or at school, is also an executive function. And what I really want to highlight here is that these are skills. And what I mean and what I want to really focus in here on is that skills take time and practice to learn. So it might sometimes feel like a lack of effort. If your child isn't paying attention to what you're telling them to do, it might feel like a lack of effort. But the reality is that attention is a skill that has to be learned. And it needs to be learned as early as possible because it is the sort of underlying uh, basis for learning other things. I'm a speech language pathologist. I mostly work in speech and language, but you can't learn anything speech or language related if you're not paying attention to what I'm saying. And the same holds true in every facet of education, right? So it's really the underlying skill that you need, but it is a skill and it's not reflective of a child's effort, which I think can be tempting to consider. So again, skills that everyone needs, everyone can struggle with. I mean, everyone can struggle with executive functions. They just gets harder and more is asked of you as you get older. And so I certainly sometimes find myself having planned poorly or a little disorganized or even emotionally dysregulated, right? So this is something that everyone can struggle with, and every child is learning. But what I really want to highlight here is that although every child is learning this and they will learn a lot of executive functioning aspects and skills almost passively because of their environment, because of who they're surrounded by and what they're doing, I think it's important that we take a pretty active role in shaping this too, because again, it's this underlying foundation to learning more broadly. So even if if your child was to acquire attention, say at the end of this year, they're much better paying attention, and that acquired naturally. They got that skill naturally. Uh, they might have missed things all year long that their peers got because they learned that skill a little bit earlier, right? Having these executive functions early are going to help you to learn because learning kind of compounds off of itself constantly. Okay, so now to the important thing, right? And that's how do we support this at home? That's a quick look at why it's important, but what are we going to do about it? So going into this discussion, I like to highlight the fact that a lot of executive functioning is about visualizing the future. And this comes from a famous speech language pathologist named Sarah Ward. She talks about running the mental movie in your mind of what comes next and what you should be doing, what it looks like, what the steps are of that task you have, and how you can accomplish that, and how it can be the same as it was yesterday, but maybe a little bit different, right? Because you use your memories to inform how you think about the future, but it's not going to be an exact replica of what it was yesterday, right? And so that side of those differences, that's where cognitive flexibility comes in. But all of these kind of connect to this visualizing the future. When you can visualize what comes next, you're going to organize your time better, you're going to plan better, you're going to manage your time better, and you're going to organize not just your time, but your space and the materials you need. You're going to put the item you need to bring to school where you're going to find it in the morning because you thought about how I'm going to wake up and what my morning routine is going to be, right? And kids are going to do this increasingly on their own as they get older. But as a parent, it's really important that you are mindful of how you're modeling this for them, firstly, and then how you're encouraging them to take um, a more ownership, more authorship of that role themselves as they get a little bit older. So I want to hone in here on working memory, one of those three key foundations of executive functioning. And when you think of working memory, I want you to think, you can firstly think of mental math. I find that's really helpful because mental math, you try to do it in your head. You have to do an equation, find the solution, hold on to it, think what's the next step, apply it to that solution, think of that next step, keep going. And basically, you realize the limits of your working memory when you're doing mental math because a lot of us aren't very good at math. I'm certainly not great at mental math, so I realize my limits pretty quickly. But working memory is much broader than that. It's kind of everything. It's kind of all your active memory, all the memory you're working with at any point in time. A really common thing to experience as an adult is you walk into a room and you realize, why was I here? I forgot why I came here into this room. It just kind of it left my working memory before ever making it to my short term. And that means now I'm left wondering what was my plan here? And if you're lucky, you have a visual cue, you're in the kitchen and your stomach's rumbling and you think, okay, I'm hungry and I'm going to eat some food. That's probably why I came here, right? But you might not have. And so helping yourself to offload some of that working memory is what we want to talk about first. So you support working memory with multimodal learning. And I think it's easiest to demonstrate with the comparison to math. Mental math and written math, even if you're doing the exact same math problem, I personally, and I think most of us would agree that the same problem is significantly easier when it's written down. You've offloaded how much of that information you have to keep processing live in your head, and you've given yourself another source to store it. And I think this is really important for kids and for students because what the difference here, what you see is I ask a child a question just verbally, and they can't answer it. I asked them that same question with the option of writing it down, like writing that math down, and they can answer it correctly. And you're giving them the chance to demonstrate a skill that they already have, like a knowledge that they have, but they can't show it without that extra step, that extra support. And this can translate far outside of a classroom too, though. And so we're going to talk about that a bit. So when I say multimodal, I just mean multiple modalities, multiple mediums, different avenues, different senses. You can think about seeing things, hearing things, physically doing things, moving around. And we're going to talk about this a lot. So you want to start it all with your language. And this is really going to kick in at home. Most of your language should be about supporting your children in visualizing what it is they have to do. So instead of saying, tell me, explain, or asking a question that basically just asks them to describe it verbally, a really common question parents ask is, how was your day? What did you do at school? And a really common response parents will see is, I forgot. I don't know. And it's not usually that they actually forgot what they did. It's not generally a problem of short-term memory. It's generally a problem of accessing that information on the fly right then and there. And you can sidetrack some of that by offloading how much of it is verbal, how much of it is description verbally, which already could be difficult for them, or maybe it's not that difficult, but it's just only one avenue for them to recall that info. So instead of saying, tell me, explain, you can say, draw it out, map it out, show me. That's the big one that I really recommend. Or, act it out, gesture it out. This can be really useful for them having the chance to remember on the fly as they are acting this out, as they are drawing it out. It also really comes in handy in the home when you're trying to do new routines. So if you want your young child to kind of take on a new chore or take on those, bedtime routines, morning routines, getting ready for school routines, having them explain what the steps of those are verbally might work, but it's generally much more effective to have them show you what it would look like. So show me what it looks like to get ready for bed, show me what it looks like to get ready for school, or show me what it looks like to do this new chore, this new thing I want you to have, right? I understand I'm talking to a group of, the difference in parents and children between grades K and 6 is pretty wide. So I understand some parents are going to be thinking, I don't care about bedtime routines, and some parents are going to be thinking, I care a lot about that kind of thing because that's what I need right now. Um, so you can have them act it out, actually run through it. And like we said before, part of visualizing the future is thinking back on the past. So once they've acted it out and run through it with you, and they're walking through the steps of this process, and explaining it as they do it, and you're filling in the gaps for them as you go, then when it's in the future, when they're doing that on their own and they're visualizing it, now they have that memory to grasp onto, right? That memory of, I've done this before. I did this with my mom. I did this with my dad. I remember how it went, and now I can use that to inform my idea of what it should look like in the future. The last one here is a different strategy that I wouldn't say is about reading it or about visualizing it, but it is multimodal, and that's reading something out loud. This is something I really, really encourage if you are a parent who likes to kind of walk your kid through some assignments or look over stuff with your child. I can't stress enough how incredibly useful this is. And it's such a simple, such a small thing. I work with a lot of students. I will have my students write something for me, and they might make a bunch of errors. I might see immediately 5 clear errors in what they've written. And then I might ask them to read it back, and they read it back silently in their head. And I say, "Did you notice anything?" And they say, "No, it's good, it's perfect." And I just say, "Oh, cool, read it again. This time, read it out loud." And then they might catch 3 of those 5 errors independently with nothing else. No other instructions from me. They might just catch it on their own. Because when you're reading something out loud, it's visual you're reading, it's orthographic, which means it's written, and also it's auditory, it's coming back. There's like a loop coming back into your ears, and there's all these extra opportunities to catch what the error might be. And that can be really useful because then you, as the parent who might normally spend some time kind of proofreading and correcting your child, now you don't have to do that as much, right? Because they caught half of that themselves. And the other thing I noticed too is that sometimes they might have written it incorrectly, but said it correctly, which is really great too as a parent and for your child, because when you then correct them and you say, I heard that. I heard you say it right. So a really common example would be like using the past tense when they meant the present. They wrote past, it was supposed to be present. They said it as a present, or vice versa. You can say, I heard you say it right, but you've written it wrong, and maybe it's because you're going too fast or whatever. But now you're not playing infinitely the bad guy as a parent, which, sometimes as educators and as the people kind of making adjustments and helping our kids learn, we kind of can play that role as like the bad guy where it's like, oh, I'm here to tell you you made all these mistakes. Now you're saying you made a mistake, but I also heard you say it correctly. You've already proven that you can do it. You've already proven that. And it does lighten the load on you and on them through that process, right? So I love reading it out loud as just another option for multimodal learning. And generally, multimodal learning is really about giving you another avenue for encoding or recalling information. Basically, when something is not just verbal, but it's written or drawn or shown in a physical way, that's just one more chance for you or for them to remember something or to have an observation or an insight. And it really can help. Let's say if your child is the child who shows up at home after school and you ask, what did you do at school? And they say, I forgot. I don't know. I don't remember. If you can have them kind of draw what they did in their school day, I usually find kids have an easier time doing that. And it gives them one more chance, one more means of answering that for themselves without you needing to give them any more direction or more questions. And it offloads how much of that is being done live in their working memory and in that sort of auditory processing. It gives them just another option. Yeah, it gives everyone more to work with. And I really encourage us to, when we're talking about older kids, grade 6 and even well beyond, especially when you're navigating conflicts, which at home, especially if your child has siblings tend to fight. I have 4 siblings. I got into a lot of fights. And you get into some trouble and you get into these complicated situations, and you might not have been there to witness it all. And you can, of course, you might want to just say, explain what happened, tell me what happened. And that can be a good option, but I really, really encourage you to and have them draw it out because you almost always get more information, whether because they have drawn something they didn't say or because in the process of drawing it, they remembered something they might have otherwise forgotten. And then you get more information and you can address that problem more holistically and give them more credit where credit is due. And then you can approach it in a way that's going to be more conducive for their betterment and yours, right? Yeah. And generally speaking, when I talk about multimodal learning, I like to think of how you have eight senses and they can either help you or hinder you in your learning process. And that can be learning for school learning. It can be learning at home again for those tasks and those chores and those acts of daily living, right? That the youngest kids all the way up into, fairly older kids are learning, right? And what you want to do anytime you introduce a strategy into their life for them to support their executive functioning is you either want to incorporate more of their senses into the activity itself, or you want to give them the chance to kind of control some of those senses. So what do I mean by control? In school, we include a lot of works with fidgets and wobble stools and maybe giving students movement breaks, or I wouldn't say headphones are super popular in school, but they can be very popular with kids, especially as they get a little bit older and they're doing writing assignments and stuff. And in grade six, child might want to be listening to music while they do some work at home. And listening to music might feel counterintuitive to learning, but if they're listening to something that is really consistent or familiar, either it's an instrumental tune, which I understand parents might think my kid doesn't like instrumentals. Most video game soundtracks are instrumental and they're designed to not be distracting, and most kids like video game soundtracks. Movie soundtracks are another great example, or even listening to regular songs that they've heard a million times can be helpful too. And that option allows children to control what could otherwise be an avenue for distraction. If they're listening to something they're really familiar with on a loop, uh, they're not going to get distracted by sounds in their environment. And the same kind of holds true for, fidgets. If they want to move around, run around like crazy, it can be tempting sometimes to stop them because you might think that I need them to look like they're paying attention. I need them to look like they're working on a task. But if you stop someone who really wants to move from moving, typically all they're going to start thinking about is move. I want to move, I want to move, I want to move. And they might start shaking and doing other things that might be distracting. Whereas if you can give them something predictable and minimally distracting, right? Wobble stools or fidget spinners are a greater example. And stools might be hard to get in the house, right? But it's pretty easy to find Dollarama fidgets or fancy fidgets and give your kid an option to kind of use those to sort of help regulate themselves as they're doing tasks. Or you can incorporate it into what it is that you want them to do. So uh, family projects, but I'm going to skip over that one for now. I think what I want to get at with this is this idea that if you want them to learn something new, it's helpful for them to get that sort of hands-on learning. I mean, that's a really common, familiar term to most of us, and this idea that the best way to learn something is by doing it. And that is something that I think we all can relate to and oftentimes understand, but we don't always recreate for our kids. Sometimes we expect them to learn just by us talking to them and walking them, like telling them what they need to be doing. But the reality is that, it's much easier to learn something when you're doing it. And doing it with you and having feedback from you can be really helpful for them actually learning that as they go. Okay, another point on language is job talk. I love job talk. You're going to want to use it a lot at home. It applies to the whole age range of kids that we're talking to today, but also all the way up into adulthood. So, job talk is the idea that instead of telling your child what exactly it is they need to do, you can give them a title. If you tell them to read a book, that's one thing, but you tell them instead to be a reader. And when you tell them to be a reader, they have to start asking questions of themselves, like, what does a reader look like? What does a reader do? And when they're asking those questions and visualizing what that looks like, that's you actually asking them to do the executive functioning themselves. Whereas a lot of this, you're going to be supporting them indirectly and supporting them in ways that you have to because you're a parent and they're very young. But this is a nice step, even from the youngest ages, where you're just asking them, what does a reader look like? What does a listener look like? What does a dishwasher look like or a teeth brusher look like, right? You can take whatever it is that you want them to do and kind of give it a title. And then they have to think what that means and what I need and what are the steps of making that happen. And I like to highlight this. I think for this group, I think it might resonate with everyone, but maybe if your child is in grade six, you might think this feels a little young. I can't uh, encourage you enough to still use it. You can scale it up, right? So it might say researcher, I might say presenter, I might say that's for school related things, right? But you can also find these similar things at home where you just need to scale it up a little bit. Um, and just help support this information, I have there's a study done on adults where they took two groups of adults and they wanted to see how to encourage voter turnout. And they basically had one group, someone came in and they just called them voter, voter, voter. They said, "Thank you so much, voters. It means the world that voters like you came out and that you turn out on voting day." And the other one, they had the same guy come, give the same spiel. He didn't say voter a bunch. And the group where they said voters a bunch turned out more. So that title still rings true and still has a meaningful and significant effect even into adulthood. And so I really want to encourage you to, we start this thing, this job talk when your students are very young, your children are very young, but it doesn't really go away. You just kind of scale it up. You don't want to call grade six. You don't want to say to your grade six student child, uh, be a teeth brusher. They probably know how to brush their teeth. But you can, kind of encourage them to be a writer, to be a researcher, to kind of that level, right? Okay. Now, another multimodal strategy that I really encourage you to use at home is gamify. And what I want to kind of pause for a second to talk about here is the idea that learning and games and play might not go hand in hand because sometimes people might think that, kids want to play, we want them to learn, and those are counterintuitive or counterproductive to each other. But in reality, I think it's a easily or I think it's a misconception to think that play is inherently motivating. I think that play is inherently informative, and then our brains evolved to motivate play. Kids get dopamine when they play games because playing games is informative and it helps them learn necessary skills that they need for life and necessary skills that they need to succeed socially, to succeed even academically, right? Like this is something that your brain has developed, evolved to reward because it is useful. And so when we're talking about what attention looks like, how to support executive functions, how to help kids get things done, and improve their kind of academic seeming skills or those acts of daily living, I don't want to encourage us to lose the creativity and the sense of play that I think is going to be incredibly motivating, especially for this group, right? And I think that that is such a great avenue for learning, and we really want to capitalize on it. So whilst we want to be encouraging our young children to still be taking on roles and still be doing things at home and doing more of the chores or the tasks, and it can be small things or big things, we can still incorporate those into games. So how do we do that? It can be a little exhausting to make every single task a game. So there's a couple ways to make that a bit easier. You can either gamify how you frame it. So let's say your kid really loves video games. You can use video game language like experience or objectives or side quests. I just had a grade two student actually talk to me about this today. They mentioned trust in terms of experience points. And I could see that they're already doing this where they're framing parts of their world in a video game speak. And so that was something that I assume wasn't taught to them. Maybe someone else explicitly taught it. But I think that games tend to be interesting to kids. And if you meet them in the area that they're already interested in, it can make it easier to have them do newer and more difficult things. And the other option here is to gamify the to-do list. Let's say, I think I would really encourage you to have your child, as they get a little bit older, have a sort of checklist or to-do list of what they need to get done. And that can start when they're really, really young. It can be just, your routines, your morning routines, your bedtime routines. Here's what you have to do. Here's what you have to do. And as they get older, right, you can scale it up to, academic work or extracurriculars, or house, chores, that kind of thing, right? So it scales very differently depending on how old your child is. But you want to gamify the to-do list. And what I mean by that is instead of having just a checklist, which is fine, and I encourage checklists, it is a nice visual modality too, on top of keeping it all in your head. You can also turn that into a game, right? So Maybe it's a game that involves drawing on your checklist. Maybe it's a game that has a whiteboard checklist and you have a Nerf gun with a little suction bullet. And when you finish a task, that item, you get the chance to shoot at it with your Nerf gun. And either when you hit it or after 2 minutes pass, you move on to the next thing. Or maybe it's a paper checklist and you get to rip off the part that you're done with and you get to crumple it up as a base or a basketball and shoot hoops for a minute or two, just to make it more fun, make it more engaging. I like that option because it allows you to gamify the experience, no matter what that experience is. You don't have to gamify each and every individual task. You get to just gamify the to-do list instead. But you can also gamify the task itself. And a common one would be like a race or a competition. I like self-competitions in terms of, how do I this time I did my task, my job, my chore, my routine. How does it compare to the past times I did it? Or racing and things that you can race. Don't race everything. Not everything should be a race. Some things need to be accurate and clean and tidy and successful. But some things can be races, and it can be helpful to have that extra level of motivation when you're introducing something brand new. And kids, youngest kids, even all the way up to oldest children, they tend to be motivated by competition, but they also like games. And if you introduce the skill and the task you want them to kind of learn as a game instead of a task, it's a real nice and sneaky way to successfully get them doing something that will benefit them. And then here's a specific example that I like as a speech language pathologist. I work a lot with speech and language. I really like Salad Bowl. It's also called Fishbowl. It's a real party game. People use it all the time for fun, just as a game. I really encourage it for learning. This one I would apply more to academic learning. If you're if you wanted to do this with your young child who's learning language, like grade one, grade two, this is great just to play the game standard as is. It's taboo and then charades and then keywords. You can find instructions for this online very easily. It's a great way of learning language as a kid. That's more my little pedestal of a speech language pathologist, less about executive functioning. If you wanted to use it for academic purposes, say they're in grade five, grade six, and they're learning terms, they're learning, you know, different terminology in religion or different terminology in socials or English, etc. You can use those terms for these tasks. So you have a bowl full of little slips of paper, and on them you have the terms that your child needs to learn for school, and you get to kind of sit down as a family and play this game of salad bowl, where you're really just playing taboo charades and then keywords. But meanwhile, while you play a game and everyone laughs and has fun, your child is learning terms they need for school. So I really encourage it. It's a lot of fun, regardless of how you use it. Now, we've already mentioned how visualizing time is really essential to executive functions. And I think from a very, very young age, teaching kids how to not just understand time, but visualize it is incredibly important. So I'm going to go through a couple options we have here. You can use existing resources like time timers. These are these analog timers that you spin, and there is a visual kind of correlate that counts down. So in this case, it's this red space, and it gets smaller and smaller as the time decreases. This is a nice alternative to something like a digital timer where the numbers change, but aside from numbers changing, there's no additional visual. Another visual just like this would be like hourglasses. I don't like hourglasses because they're a little bit hard to understand how far they really are into them, but that is a clear visual. It's only a visual. There's no numbers attached to it. But you know when the hourglass is out, you know when it's half full, and you know when it's full, right? So you can see how much time you have left in some kind of visual uh, correlate, corresponding image. Now, the thing that I teach a lot of my grades one, my grades two, even my grade three students is how to read analog clocks, which I know feels kind of outdated since everything is digital. I really encourage analog as much as possible. Analog is again that visual. It's this clear, like when half an hour passes, it's half the clock. When 15 minutes pass, it's a quarter of the clock. It's that that extra layer of what time looks like goes a long way for children understanding how to plan their time. So usually if I'm teaching this to my students, I first make sure they know how to read an analog clock and we test it. I test them, they test me, we make a game out of it. And then I have them block time. So we look, what does 15 minutes look like? What does 30 minutes look like? What does 37 minutes look like? And then to help them actually plan how to do the things they need to do, whether at school or at home, you start to map on to a time, like a clock, a whiteboard clock or a physical clock, um, or just a piece of paper, right? That's the easiest one. You just map on, here's 10-minute sliver of time. And in those 10 minutes, here's what you have to get done. And here's the next 10-minute sliver of time. And in those 10 minutes, here's what you have to get done. And that kind of thing. So that might be for their routines or for their tasks, but it's supporting their ability to understand not just how time moves and how much time they really have, but also how to uh, fill that time with the tasks they need to do. I might skip over calendars. Calendars are great, and I do think grade sixes are going to start to get calendars because I believe in grade six they get their Chromebooks. And once they get their Chromebook and a dedicated device, they're going to probably start using calendars. I do think some younger ages might get physical planners. The only thing I want to point out here with these, I don't want to get into it too much, but calendars should be treated as a visual where you look at them and you immediately understand how much free time you have, how much the work time you have, things that are due immediately. And I think that whilst we won't spend a lot of time teaching our young children to do this, it's worth knowing what you're modeling for them because I imagine as parents, many of us have calendars. And so you might want to just think about how to improve your calendar for your own sake. And then once your child gets a little bit older, that gives you a nice, robust model to kind of pull from, and you can start navigating it together. Okay. A little more with time. Finding time. Finding time is the simple concept of where are the clocks? And I love this one for the youngest of kids, even to the older kids. Having your child gain a better sense of what time is it, and I care a little bit about the time. And you can combine this with the job talk by saying maybe, hey, for today, I want you to be the timekeeper. And you can give them the title of timekeeper and have them kind of let you know what time it is. Or if you want to skip the title entirely and you just think you're at home, you're doing your thing, and you wonder what time it is, yeah, you could always check a clock, but you could just ask your child if they're in the room, hey, what time is it? And then make them do that work for you. The idea is that you're encouraging even the youngest of children to look at time, think about time, and keep that in mind because although that seems really trivial and small when they're in grade one, their growing awareness of time and time passing, especially, is going to be really useful for them in developing both academic skills and general life skills. And guessing the time is another way of doing this, and I love this as a game, right? Kids love games, so you just turn to your child and you say, "What time do you think it is?" And you don't let them look for sure, and they make a guess, and then maybe you make a guess too if you want to make it a competition. You don't have to. You could. You make a guess too, and then you guys kind of see how accurate you both were. And maybe this is an ongoing game. Maybe there's a board where you keep their score of how close they were, and you get to put their record in. And they're not competing against you, but they're competing against themselves to get as accurate a guess as they can. And it's nice for them to kind of keep in mind uh, time passing and what they're doing and where they are, what activities they're doing, and how accurate they are. And this tends to change, right? They might be more accurate in an activity that they're incredibly familiar with, or that is connected to a really like scheduled routine, or maybe they're really inaccurate when the activity is something that they love and that time kind of disappears on them, right? They are having a blast, having the most fun. People always say time flies when you're having fun. And that's totally fair, and it's not a bad thing, but it can mean that they might have a harder time perceiving how much time is passing. So it's good practice for them, even from a very young age. And you can turn it into a game. I get that it feels like a very small thing. Uh, these are skills that really do carry forward to kids as they get older. And I work with a lot of older students who do struggle with time awareness and time and sense of time passing. And it's something that you can kind of start bolstering for your child even from a very young age. The catching time is another fun one for a game perspective. If you have an activity, whether it's a game or a task or some homework or tutoring or whatever it is, and you set a timer for it, even if it's cooking, right? Even if you've got cookies in the oven or something, and you got a timer set for that, you could just ask them to make their best guess when it's the last 15 seconds, 10 seconds of it. And that's them trying to catch the time. And that's this idea of you're going to do something else. They're not going to be counting down. But it's a game where they are learning to passively keep track of time moving. And that's going to go a long way for them down the road in bolstering that time awareness. Yeah, this idea of beating the clock, of telling you what time it is before the timer actually goes off. The final one here, the one that scales up the most with age, I think, is estimating time. It is something that I think people of all ages can struggle with. It is very useful to begin as young as possible. I've made a separate slide for that reason. Uh, when you're estimating time, you're taking a task, a hobby. It doesn't have to be something tedious, but just something that they're going to do. And you think, how long would this take you? And you ask how long it would take you, and they guess how long it's going to take them to get that thing done. And then you think about once it's done, how accurate was that guess? And you reflect on it and you adjust your guesses now. Now you know, okay, it'll take me this long to get ready in the morning. It'll take me this long to shower and to brush my teeth and to get in my pajamas, or this long to do this assignment, or to transition between arriving home from school and being ready for an extracurricular, right? That's one of those lost times, I think, where students really underestimate how long it can take to transition between activities. And that's an area where I think it really helps to support them in paying attention to that transition period. And so they make a guess and you reflect on how accurate it was and you adjust it. As they get older and they get more complicated instructions for more complicated assignments, you're going to start kind of thinking about, here are the instructions. Let's break down the instructions you got for this assignment into a sort of checklist, and let's assign how long we think each step is going to take. This really comes from an existing strategy called Get Ready, Do Done. I encourage you to look into it online. I don't think I'll have time to get into it today, but this is kind of based off that idea of you want to help your child to understand the different steps of everything they need to do and to guess at how long each step will take them. And that's going to help them kind of organize their time. That's the basis for time management, organization, planning. It goes a long way for big skills that scale up in importance and necessity as they get older. But they begin at a very young age. And I think that it's worth investing the time up front. Okay. So all these strategies are great if you use them, right? That's always the problem. I don't mean if you use them, I mean if your child uses them too, right? They're great for you, they're great for your kid, but this goes both ways. I think anytime you're taking on uh a new strategy, a new habit, really, you need to find ways of actually encouraging yourself to make it happen. I mean, as parents, everyone's busy. Understandably so, especially, if you're parents of multiple kids. You have busy lives, busy work lives, social lives, obviously home lives with your children, with their extracurriculars, that kind of thing, right? And if you start a new habit, a new strategy, it can work for a little bit and then might fall off, right? So how do you encourage yourself to succeed in these? How do you encourage your kid to succeed in them if they're getting to an age where they're able to kind of do that particular task independently? Because if your current system works, why change it? That's really the question. That rings true for you, for your kids. It rings true for me in my life. I mean, this is just how we approach the world. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, is a real thing that is hard to ignore sometimes. So the main thing I like to start with is immediate consequences. And you can think of consequences as rewards. You can think of consequences as both good and bad things, possibly bad things for failing to do something, and possibly good things for succeeding to do something. I think the key here, though, isn't consequences, it's immediate. It's having a reward system that's going to reward you for successfully implementing a strategy at home, or successfully reward them for implementing a strategy or doing a strategy seems like a big word, but it could be as simple as, successfully brushing their teeth, successfully getting ready for school. It doesn't have to be this big thing, right? It can be successfully, tying their shoes, right? It doesn't need to be a big thing, but they've successfully done this new habit that you're working on together. They should get a fairly immediate reward for succeeding. And it doesn't have to be a big reward. It can be small. It should be proportional. It can be, if they do something really big, you can give them a big reward. But it could be as small as, a break, some time outside, some time if they love to read, it could be time with a book. If they love to play a game, it could be a chance to play a game. Uh, it really depends on what your kid's interested in, right? But you want to give them something immediate, something to say to reinforce the fact that, I did something new, and I got something out of it, and now I want to keep doing this. So start small and reward. And start small is just the other half of that, right? Because I think you really shouldn't, take on more. You as a parent shouldn't take on too much all at once. I'm going through a bunch of strategies. Uh, you can't try and change a whole bunch of things all at once. It's going to fall apart, right? So start small, pick one, and then reward both yourself and your child for succeeding. Now, I wanted to kind of highlight here, this one's going to come in, I think, mostly with your older children, but I also wanted to highlight here from a parent perspective in terms of what you model. So a really common timeline if your child has assignment or just a task they need to do for school, right? It could be a project, it could be something small, it could be something big. Usually there's a task, there's a deadline, and then the major consequences kick in late. Mostly consequences for failing to do a task. Yes, you might get, you know, slightly in trouble at school, but if we're talking grades, those come later. And it can be difficult to motivate yourself when the consequence the supposed reinforcer, grades are supposed to reinforce you to do well in school. They're supposed to be your motivation to do well in school, but grades come really late. So we want a more measured approach where you have a task and then immediately you get that reinforcer. And it's nice to break down the task into smaller pieces. This really kicks it. I show this to students all the way up into grade 12. I use this a lot with my older students. I wanted to highlight it here for parents of younger kids because I think that it's difficult to model this as a parent. If you're helping your child do a project or an assignment or something, for you, you can probably get it done very quickly and very easily because something that's difficult for a grade two student is not going to be very difficult for you. And so it might feel like one bulk thing that you're going to do in one sitting. And that would be fine for you, right? But we want to be modeling for our kids what it looks like to break things down into manageable pieces. So even you could do that project with them or help them make it happen in, one sitting, they can't do that. So you might have to kind of manufacture this need to break even a small thing down into smaller pieces, uh, and help them kind of do that themselves and walk them through what it looks like to make that happen. And so I just think it's nice to think about what you're modeling, right? What you're modeling for your kids is going to be very important. Oh, and I've thrown in here, I meant to do this a little earlier. I like to have fake deadlines, right? This again comes more in for grade six, grades five, and then beyond. I wanted to leave this with, I know we're towards the end of the year, okay, second half of the year. And I know that, so for the grade six parents, their kids are going to be going on to middle school, and that's where things kind of start to get really intense. So I do want to kind of uh, offer some information, some supports to you that might be more easily scaled up. This is more easily used when your children are dedicating their kind of time or engineering their time, their workflow more independently. And that kicks in a bit more in grades 5, 6, and then of course into grade 7. Okay. And to that same extent, I wanted to talk about the Pomodoro technique. Again, this is one that I would recommend mostly be used for our older children. It's this idea of when you have to do something for a great length of time, something repetitive. And I'm usually talking about it from a school perspective, but it could be a home task, something that's long and takes a while. Um, you want to be kind of interspersing work with break, with work, with break. And so the full official Pomodoro technique is these 25-minute work periods, 5-minute breaks, 25-minute work periods, 5-minute breaks. That holds true. And I think it's a great tool for our grade sixers to kind of take with them into middle school. But from a younger, scaling it down for a second, if we're talking about our grade ones or grades twos and up, think about any time you're introducing something new and difficult for your child, you want to be breaking it up into smaller and smaller pieces. We're going to do it for a little bit, and then you're going to get a break. You're going to do it for a little bit, you're going to get a break, because that's going to help them kind of persevere. It's really important for persevering through difficult tasks. And when you're young and everything you're doing is brand new and you've never seen anything like this before, things that might be easy for you or for I might be a lot harder at that age, right? Okay, we are coming swiftly to the end of our chat here, but I wanted to make the comparison here between these, and you can see how these are closely aligned, right? So if you are using the Pomodoro technique and interspersing breaks and work and breaks and work, you can see how these map really nicely onto this idea of working on a task for a bit and then having a reward, and then working on a task for a bit and having a reward. They really are interconnected. Okay, so as promised, that's just some ways to support executive functions. I believe we have a Q&A open and we do have some time. But well, I'm otherwise, if we don't have any questions, we can end here. But thank you guys.